I hope you can see me and hear me. Um, Sorry, we are starting a little bit late, but welcome to today's workshop hosted by our startup Pivot on helping you all build resumes that get more recruiter callbacks. So, we have been doing this for quite some time now in terms of helping people transition to their target role. It's been about 3.5 to 4 years of building Pivot as a startup, and we have worked with over 8,000 professionals so far in these last 3.5 to 4 years. And one of the most repetitive questions that has been pointed uh, towards us is, my resume is not getting shortlisted, and that's something that happens across the board from people in all kinds of stages at all different levels. No matter which domain, it could be marketing, product management, sales, non-profits and sustainability, engineering, finance, HR, you name it, we have seen it. And also from people at different levels in the organization. It could be folks who are in early career journeys, so in their 20s, could be folks in their 30s or even 40s and 50s. Right now, what does that mean? That means two things, right? Number one is that there are clearly some resume best practices that companies expect you to follow. And if you're not doing that, then you will be penalized, meaning you won't really hear back from that many companies. And the second thing is that a lot of times people are just, it's not about that they are unaware of these best practices. They follow these best practices and they do their best to align with the job description and everything else they have heard from number of career coaches, resume experts, etc. But they still don't get shortlisted, right? Now, when that happens, it's not always your resume as well, right? So even though this workshop will focus mostly on helping you get more callbacks through a more improved version of your resume, please know that your resume is not a magic wand. There are many other factors that go into job search outside of your resume. We have seen some amazing, outstanding, beautiful resumes that align with some of the best industry standards. But at times, even those don't get shortlisted by recruiters. And the reason for that is something either related to job profile mismatch, lack of certain key fundamental skills that these companies are looking for. It could be just that you applied too late. The role's already been filled, or they have shortlisted many candidates, and a whole host of other reasons why you might not be shortlisted, right? So please make sure your resume is perfect and aligns with the best standards of the industry expectations. But at the same time, please don't only depend on your resume to land your job. There are many other things, and for those other things, we have done several other sessions talking about what are these other factors. We'll continue to do them in the future. So do follow Pivot in case you would like to understand what are these other factors that go into making a job search successful. All right, now with that behind us, let's dive in. Let's talk about today's topic, which is how to build resumes that get more recruiter callbacks, right? Now, first and foremost, let's get the most often asked question out of the way, which is, why is my resume not getting shortlisted by ATS, right? So everybody has probably heard, whoever's here with us has heard of this term called ATS, right? Is the applicant tracking software or applicant tracking system. Now, this is something that a lot of recruiters today use, which are HR tech tools, right? These are uh, prevalent almost at every organization, I would say, especially the mid to large size organizations, but also certain smaller, fast growing organizations. Why are these tools used? Primarily because there are today hundreds of people applying for each opening. 4 or 5 years ago, the market was crowded, but it wasn't so crowded as it is today. Earlier, on average, you used to see 100 to 150 job applications per opening, right? Today, you are seeing almost anywhere between 2x to 4x that number. You're seeing somewhere between 250 to 500 applications on average per opening. Now, because of that, there's obviously more competition for the candidates, which is something that we'll talk more about how to stand out through your resume in a crowded market. But at the same time, the reason these organizations are using these ATS tools is because they just don't have the human bandwidth to review each and every resume. They need to use this tool so that they can easily identify which ones out of the 500 at least meet the basic fundamental criteria. For example, an ATS might rule out any resumes which are completely misaligned from what the organization is looking for. I'll give one very good example here. We ourselves recently have wanted to hire for certain roles, and we put out a job description for a program manager role. Now, in an organization like ours, a program manager role is mostly a non-technical role. We focus more on helping our customers, our users, ensure that they have a very successful journey and a successful outcome by associating with us. That's what a program manager does. And if you read the job description, you'll very easily figure that out. Problem is, most candidates don't read the JD today because of all these job boards that allow you to just apply with a single click. So people just start blindly applying, and a lot of the applications that we even received for this role were from technical PMs or technical program managers whose focus is on developing technical products. That was not something that was mentioned anywhere in the JD by us, right? So now, because of these kind of misalignments that happen, ATS is extremely helpful in parsing out any applications which are not meeting the basic criteria. So if your application is not meeting the basic criteria, it will be immediately ruled out. Apart from that, the ATS also rules out many other applications or downweights many other applications based on a lot of different criteria that we'll talk about. Right. So I think the first thing you want to think about from an ATS perspective is the formatting of your resume. Right. So the ATS version of a resume should be very well structured. It should be very simple, very clear, and it should not try to make things too fancy. So I'll share my screen and try to show you what I mean by that. All right. So I think that is the right one. Let me try and open that. Okay, here we go. All right, I hope you all can see my screen. So this is just a sample resume, not a real person. We just took a format from another resume that we had helped prepare for one of our clients. But what you see here is a very straightforward, simple structure for a resume. I would not advise looking at the actual content here, because the reason I'm showing you this resume is mostly for formatting purpose, not for content purpose, right? If you look at the format of this, it starts clearly with a name in bold and larger font size. And then it just gives you the most basic information that's needed about the person's contact information. So their phone number, their email, LinkedIn URL, as well as their location. After that, there is a very short summary. Obviously, this summary can be longer depending on how much you want to highlight from your work experience. The more experience you have, generally, the more you would want to highlight here. But it's a simple summary section, no fancy columns, no fancy tables or icons or anything like that, right? And then if you scroll down, the work experience section. This one here, again, for simplicity's sake, we have just added some placeholders. But if you look at the structure, it's extremely, extremely clear, easy to follow. There are no confusing distractions. There are no sidebars. There's no different fonts being used. This is generally very straightforward and to the point, where we are talking about each work experience in one section here, then moving to the next experience. And you can see everything is done very consistently. The dates are always here on the right, the company and the position title on the left. Position title has been italicized, and then you have the bullet point structure to describe your experience. So it may not look like very fancy, it may not look very stylish, but that's okay. That is what ATS is looking for. ATS, at least as of today, prioritizes clean structures, simple structures, easy to understand formats, rather than something that is fancy with too many columns, too many tables, too many colors on the page, right? So we'll also show you one of the examples of other resumes where you don't have a very ATS friendly structure. But just before that, we'll talk more about this one, right? So now that we have covered the work experience section, you scroll down to the education section, and again, you see very simple. Here, one thing you could add sometimes from a content perspective is noting down your key achievements or contributions that you might have done as part of your university clubs, association, or anything related to your participation outside of academia within your education background can be helpful, especially if you're in your 20s. It generally does point out to people how well you are rounded rather than just focusing on academics. You're doing things outside of that. But again, that's not really an ATS factor. From an ATS perspective, things are very simple. Uh, at the bottom here, we have the skills and interest column or sections which highlight very briefly what are the most important skills that you possess and certain interests which might be conversation starters during the interview process, right? So there are many things that you can improve even in this resume, but the most important thing to take away from this particular resume template is its simplicity and its comprehensiveness. It is including all of the key sections that are needed to have the ATS proofread your resume, assess it, and then shortlist it if there is a good fitment, right? So I think that's one of the things you need to think about from a formatting perspective. Now, let's look at one resume that is not extremely ATS friendly. Okay, so this is the other resume that I wanted to show. Now, if you look at this resume, yeah, let's see this resume. Now, if you look at this one, what you see here, it's well structured. There are these, nice little sections on the left, on the right. There is a blue color that you can see, and generally, it's not a bad resume if you really think about it. It covers all the key sections. But what is the main issue here? The main issue here here is that it has two columns. It's not just one column. It has two columns, and then later it has just one column, right? And there are these blue lines that demarcate the section headers, right? It also, it also has this table on the top which is completely in blue. So there are many different things that are happening. Another thing that's happening here is this: while this may seem small, you're using these special characters, right? It's not a hyphen, it's just another type of hyphen. This is a real hyphen. This is more like a bullet point, which is being used in between sentences here or in between the position title here. Now, what is this doing? This is confusing the ATS. The two columns confusing the ATS. The blue color is confusing the ATS. It's not being able to easily understand all of the content the way you have actually written it in this resume. It might end up reading content, for example, prospecting and qualifying leads, and then it might after that read this. Why? Because ATS reads from left to right, just like most humans do. It reads left to right. It doesn't read top down. So you have to think about whether these tables, which are recommended in a lot of resume templates, are adding any value from an ATS perspective, especially. So you want to make sure that your formatting is done in a way which is very easily understandable. right? Now, let's talk about the other ATS factors. The other ATS factor that you should think about here is your keyword optimization, right? So whenever you are writing a resume, you want to make sure that your resume is aligned with the keywords in the JD. And what are these keywords? So usually the keywords are very industry specific, very role specific points which these ATS are trained to look at. They are given instructions by the hiring managers and recruiters to specifically focus on certain keywords and give them higher weightage when they are included in the right manner. Now, a lot of people, maybe a lot of you who are here in the room today, might already understand what this actually means. And you might have even done it because we have seen a lot more people today stuffing keywords in their resumes. Stuffing keywords mean when you identify, let's say there is a certain keyword to be included, um, then you start putting it everywhere in every second bullet point in your summary section, skills section, everywhere. Now, that is called keyword stuffing. That doesn't always work. Sometimes it can actually backfire if it's not very organically integrated into your resume. So you want to make sure, firstly, that you're identifying the right keywords. How do you identify the right keywords? There are many different ways to identify the right keywords. Today, the easiest way is to use AI. Go copy your, let's say, JD that you're looking at, paste it into GPT, and ask GPT to help you identify the most important keywords from that JD. Apart from that, you can also do things on LinkedIn, which could help you identify your keywords very, very easily. Um, Give me a second, I'll share my screen and I'll also walk you through that. Actually, my LinkedIn is currently logged out, so I won't be able to do that. But if you go on LinkedIn, what you can do in the top section header is you can actually look at your profile section, go to resources, and in there, there should be more info, more profile info. And when you click on that, there will be a way to identify keywords based on the role that you're targeting. So you'll have to fill out the role that you're targeting. It will ask you. And after that, you will be able to uh, also look at what are the keywords associated in LinkedIn for that particular role. The other way is just to read the JD yourself and see what are the most highlighted points with regard to requirements in that JD. So if you look at the requirements section, a lot of times they would have pointed out that we are looking for XYZ skills, we are looking for somebody who has mastery over XYZ tools. So if you look at one of the JDs that I have open right now, I'll share that and maybe we can take a look at it together. All right. So now if we are looking at this role, this is just a random role that I'm looking at right now, Senior Marketing Manager, Amazon Fresh. Now, when you start looking at this JD, there's a lot of description about the company. We are one of the fastest growing Amazon businesses. Um, right. We are looking for XYZ people. Now, this is all good. This is all high level. You should definitely read through it. That's one of the first points that I want to make is most of us are not used to reading detailed job descriptions. But when you're applying to roles, I think it can be the make or break between you getting an interview and not getting an interview if you don't read the JD properly. So please try and read as many words as you can in the JD because it will give you new insight which most other people are missing. So that's one of the easiest way to actually stand out from the crowd because most people are not reading JDs. But if you do, you can do this keyword optimization. You can have better alignment with the JD. Now, when we are looking at this JD, the sections that you want to focus on are the key job responsibilities and basic qualifications and preferred qualifications. This is where most of the keywords are going to be. So now, when you're looking at key job responsibilities, each of the bullet points most likely will have certain keywords that you want to include as much as possible. So when they're talking about this particular bullet, right? They're talking about executing strategy, targeting key prime customer cohorts, and with an objective of increasing prime penetration. So, what are the keywords here? The keywords here are managing customer cohorts, right? You are trying to create and execute strategy to target certain customer cohorts for Prime. So that's what Amazon is wanting to see in your profile. Have you managed customer cohorts? Have you increased market penetration of new products? So those are the keywords that you're trying to see if you can also include in your resume, right? Apart from that, you can also dive into the qualifications section. This is where they will highlight very tangible skills that they're looking for, including software tools, etc. So, for example, they have talked about experience using data and metrics to drive improvements. Now, obviously, this is a bit vague, to be honest, but you will have to think about what kind of marketing data, what kind of KPIs can I include in my resume, right? That's definitely something that you would want to include. For same thing, they've talked about Excel and Tableau for data analytics. So obviously, they're looking for somebody who is somewhere around 5 to 10 years experience, but definitely somebody who has excellent mastery over these kind of tools and skills. So this is how you can just read through a JD and identify keywords very simply. If you don't want to do it yourself, please just copy and paste the JD into GPT or some other AI tool and ask how to identify the right keywords. And the second aspect, once you have identified the right keywords, is that you want to make sure you're only including the ones where you have real experience. A lot of times people end up putting keywords even if they don't have real experience in those areas, and that's an absolute no-no. You don't want to note down anything in your resume which is false, which is untrue. There's contrary advice out there. I know a lot of people will say, no, sab chalta hai, let's just go ahead and do it. But actually, we have seen that strategy backfire many times when people come to us asking for help with their resume. Many times we see things which they should not have put, and they are not hearing back from companies. But also, if they do hear back and they can't justify the experience that they have put in their resume, that's an absolute red flag, and you get rejected pretty much right away. So please be as honest as possible and make sure you're only including the keywords where you have real experience, right? So this was the second part with regard to ATS. Now I'll just stop sharing my screen. But the other thing that you want to think about here is, from an ATS perspective, also metrics and numbers, right? So a lot of times we see resumes which exclude any impact, any measurable, quantifiable metrics that people can look at and say that, okay, this person has created certain kind of an impact, right? So for that, you have to think about, for any role that you are in, you have to think about what are the kind of KPIs that I have influenced in my career, right? There may be different types. There may not be just one. We have seen many times people feel very, very challenged by the fact that they don't have influence over any measurable KPIs, right? And it can be hard for certain people. I will give you that. Like for example, if you're in a design role, like a graphic design role, it can be hard to say that I drove XYZ amount of revenues for the company or profitability for the company. But the goal here is not to always talk about KPIs which are at the organization or the company level. So when we think about KPIs, there are three different types of KPIs actually. Number one, the KPIs, and by the way, for those who might not know, KPIs are key performance indicators. These are metrics that companies use to assess their performance. So the first type of KPI is company level KPI, which is something that is impacted in different degrees by everybody in the company. So these could be your revenue, your profitability, your return on investment, or major strategic initiatives that the company has taken, like for example, market penetration in a new country and those kind of things. So these are all company level metrics. That's the first type. The second type is team specific metrics. Now these could be, let's say, we're talking about the engineering team. Now, maybe one of the goals for the engineering team is to become way more productive and efficient for this year. So their goal is to improve uh, code efficiency and speed of shipping new code and new products by, let's say, 50%. So that is not an individual specific responsibility always. It might be team specific, because maybe there are certain tools that are needed to be able to achieve that productivity and efficiency, right? So that's the second kind of KPI. And the third kind of KPI is more individual level KPI. Now, this is something which you are specifically in charge of in your role. There might be others also who also have influence over that particular metric, but you also have that. So, what could that be? Now, again, let's take the example of an engineer. Now, that could be something related to a specific product that you have worked on during the year. For example, let's say you have, as an engineer, worked on a payment functionality that reduced the amount of time it took for the payment to go through, right? So if you can talk about the KPI with regard to how you improved the speed of payment functionality, or how you improved, let's say, the error rate in terms of payments not going through. So there are different types of KPIs that you might be handling at your level. We are not talking about revenues, profitability, entry into new markets, or even something at a team level that we help the team become so much more productive and efficient. If you're not a manager and leader in your company, it will be very hard to impact these high level metrics. But because every individual has certain types of control over their own metrics, they can do that. Taking the example of a designer, right? I talked about a graphic designer. Now, again, you can't impact revenue directly, but what you may have done is created 100 plus social media creatives for your organization, and those social media creatives may have led to x amount of followers for the company page, or increase in engagement level from the followers. So you can talk about the fact that you have created 100 plus social media creatives that led to 2% improvement in your engagement rate, or something along those lines. So even a designer who may seemingly have nothing to do with numbers in their career does impact numbers. Now, why are we talking so much about numbers? Because ATS loves numbers. They really like to make sure that they are seeing people who have driven real tangible impact. And most of the ATSs are programmed to give higher weightage to people who include metrics, right? So we want to make sure that we have included metrics as well, no matter what role you're in. Now, that is, what I would say is the three main qualities of ATS-friendly resumes, right? You want to make sure your formatting is up to date and also well structured, clean, easy to understand without any fancy designs. The second thing you want to make sure is that you are optimizing for keywords that are included in the JD, and obviously try to make sure that you're not stuffing keywords too much. You're not leaving the most important ones out of the resume. You're staying balanced. You're staying somewhere in the middle, where you're including most of the keywords, especially the ones where you have direct experience, and highlighting them in your summary section, in your skill section, in your work experience section, right? The third and most important thing is that you have quantified your impact through measurable KPIs and metrics. So that's the I would say most important qualities of ATS-friendly resumes. There are obviously many other things that go into making an ATS-friendly resume, which if you would like to explore further, I would suggest that you check out our website, Pivot. The URL for our website is given in my signature. You can also schedule a one-on-one session with me on LinkedIn. If you want to reach out over LinkedIn, you can schedule a session with me on Calendly. But in the interest of time, I would like to move on to our next topic here for today, which is what are the biggest red flags that recruiters and ATSs typically reject the resume for. And I will focus more on recruiters here rather than ATS, because I think we have covered a lot of the important points already within the ATS part of. So I think there are many different types of errors that we see in resumes, because of which people get rejected and ghosted. So you have to make sure that your resume is avoiding these typical mistakes, most common pitfalls that many resumes fall into. The most basic one, the most important and basic one is, please just run a spelling and grammar check when you are finalizing your resume and sending it to anybody, or if you are submitting it in a job portal. Now, what happens is most people know that they have to do it, but still many people just forget to do it. Why? Because a lot of times you're customizing the resume for the JD, right? We just talked about keyword optimization. We talked about ensuring that you have the right KPIs. So sometimes, let's say you're applying to one of your dream roles, and when you see the JD, you feel like you will need to make certain edits in the resume. Now you start making edits, and you're in a rush. As you're in a rush, you end up making spelling and grammar errors. This happens way more often than one would anticipate, and because of that, a lot of times there are grave errors from spelling and grammar perspective, which go unnoticed by the candidate, but they don't go unnoticed by the recruiters. So you want to make sure that you don't have any spelling and grammar issues. The other thing is, a lot of times, I mean, I've already talked about it, but a lot of times people like to have very fancy resumes. I already showed one, but if I was to just quickly share another example here. So if you look at this, you see what we are seeing here, right? This kind of a resume is an absolute no-no. We talked about the design aspect, how to keep it simple and clean. This is the exact opposite of that. Now, the problem is, if you go to many of the resume builders, which this website itself is one of them, if you go to these resume builders, you click on build my resume, many of these companies give you these kind of resume templates, thinking that it's okay, right? That it's okay to put your face in it, your, all these colors, different types of icons, and many such other things, right? So this is extremely difficult, not just for the ATS, but it gives a very unprofessional vibe to your entire resume, and it doesn't stand out for the right reasons. It stands out for all the wrong reasons. So you want to make sure you're not doing any kind of these superfluous designs, which are going to make your resume get rejected pretty quickly, pretty easily, right? So that's the other thing that you want to avoid. Apart from that, what we have seen is, a lot of times people don't have the same font across their resume. They use different types of fonts. So you want to typically use a simple font, like you could have Calibri, Times New Roman, you can have Arial. These are all common fonts that people use. Try to avoid the very fancy fonts that might be there. A lot of people have started using Comic Sans or Mistral or these kind of fonts. So you want to avoid those for sure, right? I think you also want to just ensure that you're not focusing too much on your responsibilities only, but your achievements and your impact that you have created. Now, we talked about the KPIs and the measurable, quantifiable metrics earlier, right? This point is similar to that, but slightly different, I would say, because not every achievement is always quantifiable. Yes, most of them are, and yes, you should definitely include some quantifiable metrics. But the bigger picture from a recruiter perspective here is that you should be able to show that you have created an impact in your prior roles. And when you're thinking about creating an impact in your prior role, some of those impact areas could be more qualitative in nature, right? So you want to make sure, like, let's say if you are in a marketing role, right? Now, there are two types of marketing resumes. One that will talk more about the responsibilities and say things like that I created a campaign to, drive our, product discount strategy, where we, launched a new product. Now, that is something which describes what you did as part of your responsibility. There's nothing amazing or outstanding or really differentiating about this. Anybody can create a campaign. The bigger differentiating factor here is what actually happened after you created the campaign. And for that, you need to talk about the impact that you have created. So this same bullet point needs to be rephrased in a way where you talk about that you created a marketing campaign for a new product discount strategy, and it led to X many more customers, or it helped drive more conversions, Could be different types of metrics, could be different types of impact areas that you highlight here. But the more important thing is that you want to not just stop at describing your responsibility, you want to focus on the outcomes. A lot of you may be thinking about the STAR approach or the SAR approach, which is true. It can be utilized. We don't always stick with it because not every bullet point can be formatted exactly the same way, where you put situation, then task, then action, and then result. It actually sometimes becomes very long and sometimes boring to read for a recruiter. So sometimes people even skip the task part and they just do situation, action, result. Or you might put the result first and put the action later. So yes, you can use the STAR approach, you can use the SAR approach, but more important is just be grammatically accurate and put something which describes both what you have done as your key responsibility or your action item, but at the same time the kind of results and achievements that you have achieved, right? So that is the most important thing that many resumes unfortunately lack today, right? I think the other thing that we have sometimes seen is because of the proliferation of AI today, now a lot of people are using AI to write their resumes. And see, if it's making your life easier, there's nothing wrong about it. I think a lot of people are doing that today. But the problem is when you're using AI, a lot of times people are not doing proper review after AI has given them a draft. What that means is sometimes the type of language that's actually used by AI in your resume, it really misaligns with how you actually speak. And also sometimes it can be a little more jargony where it's too focused on the corporate jargons. So you want to make sure that when you're using AI today, your resume should not be full of jargons. Your resume should be clear and simple to understand. This is a point I have made several times during this particular session. That is simplicity and ease of understanding. You want to make sure that everything you're writing actually makes sense and can be understood by even an HR or recruiter professional who may not be an industry specific or domain specific subject matter expert, right? If you start using a lot of technical jargon to describe each and everything, let's say 50% or more of your resume is just full of jargons, it will become very hard for anybody to digest it. So you want to make sure that you're not using the typical too many technical jargons or even non-technical jargons, things like uh, you know go getter professional, self starter professional, those kind of things. They're very hackneyed at this point. There are a lot of people who are using those kind of things. So you want to stand out and you want to avoid those type of jargons. The last thing that I would talk about, which should be avoided at all costs, and I've already mentioned it in passing, but any sort of fabrication, any sort of lies, any sort of exaggeration of the real responsibilities and outcomes that you have achieved in your career is an absolute no-no. I think that it happens more often than one might imagine, and it's almost considered as a requirement for many professionals where they think they have to do it so that they can stand out from the crowd. The problem is you might actually stand out, but when you are in the interview rounds, you will be rejected. You could even get blacklisted. It may not happen by every single company, but if it happens even once, it can have an extremely devastating impact on your career. We have actually seen many professionals who have come to us having this problem, and we had to actually work very hard to turn around their career when they were in these kind of scenarios because companies had blacklisted them. The competitors were not hiring. There would be no, for example, experience letter that was given to them by their former employers if they had lied about certain types of achievements and responsibilities on their resume. So you don't want to jeopardize something even if it has a 1% probability of ruining your future. So that's one of the biggest things that I would say please try to avoid. Yeah, I think these were the most important points that people should think about avoiding. Apart from that, I want to see if there are now any questions that have come up in the chat here. If so, we'll start taking them up. All right. Okay, so some of you have asked for examples of LinkedIn, on LinkedIn. So we'll share those examples of resumes on the event page, and you can take a look at those resume templates. But the most important thing here, or the easiest thing here for you to check out those templates, is just go to our website. You can go to mypivot.work. It will have a lot of resume templates, including the ones that I was sharing. So you can download them for free and use them to your benefit. I think that's something that's very easily doable if you just go to our website. But we will also share them over LinkedIn and over YouTube, where we are hosting this event. All right. I found that even the team structure. Okay, so one of the questions here that we have from a LinkedIn user is that I found that even with a clean structure, Workday still doesn't parse a document correctly. Is this a good structure for Workday applications? Now, I don't have access to, uh, what specific type of ATS parameters does Workday have, which is one of the ATS platforms out there used frequently by companies. But yes, the one that I was sharing earlier, and I can share that again, is definitely a good structure that you can use for even Workday or any other ATS platform for that matter. So if you look at this one, this is one of the most simple and easy to understand structures that we have seen. There is almost zero, I would say, red flags with regard to the formatting, at least. So if your main goal is to have a clean format that does not raise any issues with ATS, use this one. Now, again, I have already mentioned it. There are many factors outside of formatting, like keyword optimization, like inclusion of the right metrics, and obviously the need to have the right experience. If you don't have the right experience that the company is looking for in terms of, let's say, the company background or the domain background, it doesn't matter what your format of your resume is. It doesn't matter whether you are aligning your keywords in the JD. All that matters is whether you have the right experience. So you again should not confuse your resume with the be all and end all of decision making criteria for the recruiters, right? You want to make sure that you are focusing on resume as one of the many factors, not the only factor in your job search. But yes, this is a fairly common and popular template that we have used with a lot of success for our candidates. All right, let's see if we have some other questions here. John was facing some difficulties after that. Okay, so Siddharth has a question about the sample two-column resume that you showed. Should we avoid putting blue lines that demarcate the different sections? Yes, ideally you should avoid thick borders that can cause some confusion. Think about it this way: anything that has the potential to confuse ATS from a formatting perspective, try to exclude that. Because if you do include it, you're not really gaining anything out of it, right? Yes, it may feel like, okay, we are providing better aesthetic feel to our resume, but most of the recruiters don't care about the aesthetics as long as it looks overall clean and easy to understand. So try to avoid thick borders. It could be a blue line, that doesn't really matter. Although typically what we have seen is black and white and gray are the only colors that most resumes can read. Obviously, there could be more sophisticated ATSs out there that can read different types of colors as well. But if you want to be safe, you want to focus on black, white, and dark gray. I think those are the most useful colors to focus on. All right. Thanks, Bharvi. Appreciate your positive reinforcement here. Okay, we have another question from John here. Is there any specific way we should write these metrics in the resume? That's a very good question, actually, John. I think um, generally you want to firstly identify the right metrics for your particular role that should ideally align with what the recruiters and hiring managers are looking for. And again, if you read the JDs, like we were looking at that marketing JD from Amazon, they talked about requirement from a data perspective that somebody should have Excel and Tableau understanding. Now, if you have built any visual dashboards using Tableau, I'm sure those dashboards have been used for certain business objectives. What were those objectives? What did the data that you presented in those dashboard actually help the organization or the team with? So yes, the first thing is to identify the right KPIs. And after that, you want to make sure that you're quantifying them in some form or fashion. It could be absolute numbers, it could be percentages. Sometimes people don't have access to the exact absolute numbers, so percentages are absolutely fine. Sometimes even a range is absolutely okay. For example, a lot of times people come to us saying, this is a KPI, I know I have impacted, but I don't really have the exact data with me. What should I do? In such cases, you don't want to lie. You don't want to completely exclude that metric because it's one of your KPIs. So you can think about putting a range. Like, for example, if you believe that the social media creatives you have made led to engagement increase on your company page, maybe rather than saying it increased by 2.3%, you might want to just say over 2%, or you might even want to say within 2 to 3% increase. I think usually these kind of ranges are very acceptable and actually are better compared to not having any metrics. So usually if you have access to the right metrics and the right numbers, then please go ahead and put them. If you don't, think about percentages, think about these ranges. Sometimes you could even think about giving relative metrics, and that is usually very helpful, I would say, when you are following competition on certain work that you've been doing. So, taking the same example of social media creatives, now maybe you don't have any access to the engagement numbers for whatever reason. Now, in this case, you can, rather than talking about engagement improvement on your company's social media pages, you can talk about how your company actually was in the top three of your competitor group for the last year in terms of number of followers, right? And you can say something along the lines of, that I helped improve our company ranking from number five to number two through these social media creatives, right? So you can think about different creative ways to give people as recruiters and hiring managers, a way to perceive what your impact at your prior role has been. I hope that helps, John. And I think you have one more question here. I'll just quickly answer that. Will the ATS pick up these metrics from a sentence, or should we kind of bold or italicize them? ATS is reading like a human who is very detail oriented would read, right? So a detail oriented human would read each and every word, regardless of whether it's bold or italicized. Now, if you bold or italicize it, there's nothing really wrong with it. Actually, it could get the attention of the recruiters better. So we generally don't say that you should bold and italicize a lot in your resume. But yes, if there are certain KPIs, if there are certain specific achievements that you want to call out, and they don't constitute, let's say, more than, you know, I would say somewhere between 15 to 20% of the overall content on your resume, I think it's fair to be able to bold or italicize the key metrics. We have a question from Smriti about sharing the resume example. I think we have shared the website link, Smriti, and we will also share the resume templates. I believe my colleague Manjri has been sharing the templates here. I think Smriti has another question here. Any advice on tailoring the LinkedIn profile that should be in sync with the resume too? Very good question. LinkedIn is by a lot of recruiters considered the new resume. So yes, you should definitely think about optimizing your LinkedIn profile in alignment with not just your resume, but the key requirements from your target role. Obviously, you can't customize your LinkedIn to each and every role, but what you should try and do is think about what are the most common types of roles that you are aiming for, and what are the most high frequency or the most common requirements from the JDs that you're targeting in your dream role. and see that your LinkedIn is including all of those major items for keyword optimization, right? And that's probably a topic for another day, Smriti, in terms of how to optimize your LinkedIn. We have actually done a couple of workshops in the past around this, but we'll keep doing them in the future as well. You can probably go to our YouTube page and look for Pivot, and then just browse through. You will, I'm sure, find certain very, very informative sessions that we have done on LinkedIn, which will answer this question. Okay, and we have a question here from Shraddha. Placement of core skills should be post professional summary or post work experience? That's a very interesting question. I would say 8 out of 10 times, Shraddha, we put it post work experience. And generally because the ATS and recruiters, hiring managers, they all want to understand what have you done in your most recent role. Most people would put anything and everything in skills that is asked in JD. So even though the skill section is standard today, it's a norm in most of the resumes. Typically, organizations would not pay a lot of attention only to your skill section. They will pay a lot of attention, on the other hand, to your work experience section. So the more higher that your work experience section is in the resume, the more attention it's going to get, and the better your chances, especially if you have had some great responsibilities or achievements in your most recent resume. Um, that being said, I think for certain kinds of roles where, let's say, especially I would say, if it's more of a leadership level role, managerial role, or a role which requires very diverse skill set, then yes, you can think about putting your skills at the top section. Sometimes also, if you're, let's say, an early career professional where you have very limited or no work experience, then in that case also you can highlight your skills above the work experience section, because in that case you don't really have a lot to showcase in your work experience, right? So might as well talk about your skills. I do think that for the managers and leaders, sometimes it helps to show your skills at the top, because you want to call out the most important skills that you bring to the table. Because usually for those roles, there's a very wide variety of skills needed, right? As a manager or a leader, you're not just a subject matter expert or an individual contributor focusing on a limited set of skills. You're focusing on a very broad variety of skills, both related to your subject matter as well as team management, people management, client management, all of those things, right? So if you can differentiate yourself by calling out the core skills that you have experience in right up top, I think that can be very powerful. So that's one thing. And then we have a question here. It seems everyone uses AI to write resume now. So how is it possible to get callbacks? Because almost all resumes are good. Very, very good question. I think this has definitely become a little bit of a problem, but not, I would say, a major problem for recruiters and hiring managers. The reason is, see, AI can be good at writing, but AI can't change the experience and the achievements and the skills that you bring to the table. It can only highlight them well. It can only help you ensure that you're structuring your sentences using the right terminologies and words well. But it cannot change the kind of experience that you have had in your last role or any role. It also does not prescribe what format you should use. It doesn't, like AI, ChatGPT, or any other tool will not tell you that, hey, you should only put your skills above work experience or below work experience, right? They will do things differently. So a lot of the decisions for your resume are still being made by you. AI can support you, but it cannot drive, it cannot decide how your resume is going to look and how your resume is going to be perceived by the hiring managers. So while AI definitely has created a lot of positive impact for many, many professionals' resumes, especially in helping ensure that the sentences are structured well and the right kind of vocabulary and terminologies are used. But it has not been able to make somebody who is below average extremely above average, right? And For 1 second, let's just assume that it even did that. The thing is that in the first screening call that you get from the recruiter, chances are that the recruiter is very experienced and they have spoken to hundreds of professionals. So in the first call itself, they'll be able to tell whether you use GPT AI to write your resume or it was something that you wrote yourself with a little help from AI. So I think there are a lot of checks and balances still for companies and recruiters to perceive the right candidates from the below average candidates. All right, I think we have covered a lot today. I hope this session was helpful. Um, there's a lot of bad advice out there when it comes to resumes. For example, if you go to most of the resume building websites today, they will give you these fancy templates with a lot of color, different columns, not easy to understand simple structures. So you want to make sure you're getting advice from the right people, the real people who actually work in the field, rather than folks who don't have real world experience in resume writing, in career coaching, and mentorship. So that's why it's important that you're following the right people on LinkedIn. Not every influencer who has 100,000 or 50,000 followers is giving you the best advice. You will have to use your own internal filters, your own critical thinking to determine what advice to take and what to not take. Um, I hope whatever I've shared with you today, you found it helpful. If you think this is something you want to get one on one support in, whether it's resume writing or LinkedIn optimization, interview preparation, or job search support to get more, let's say, visibility within the right companies through referrals, do check out our platform, which is Pivot. We have shared the URL here in my signature. It's mypivot.work. And also feel free to connect me over LinkedIn if you think I can help you in any way. Thank you again for joining, and I